HarperCollins presents Loved One by Aisha Muharrar. Read by Ladji. 1. There was no bride. There was no groom. No seating chart with my name in calligraphy. A blue dot next to Julia indicating a preference for fish. No DJ coaxing guests to the dance floor with a multi-generational crowd pleaser. No maid of honor fiddling with a sheet of white printer paper, unfolding it from eighths to fourths, then taking a theatrical deep breath before she says, "Okay, so." Which made sense because it was not a wedding. But there were approximately 100 of us gathered at Berkeley City Club, a grand Italian Renaissance revival building often rented out for private events, like weddings. And there were 2 sections of dark wood folding chairs, separated by a wide stripe of hardwood floor, an aisle, if you will. And more important, it just felt like it should have been a wedding. It's what we did that year. We went to weddings. Not together, though Gabe did ask the year before, when the invitations went out and before he'd started dating Elizabeth, if I'd be his +1 to the Tokyo wedding of his percussionist and backup vocalist. They'd met on tour with him. I would have loved to go to Japan, but I already had another wedding on the same day. By September, I'd been to 6 and RSVP'd to 3 more. I was 30. Gabe, born the same year but in December, was 29. And apparently we'd entered that stage of life where if you haven't nailed down your version of semi-formal cocktail attire, you'd better do it quick, because that's what your weekends were going to be for the next decade. This perpetual wedding season was such a well-known truth about people our age that I could feel an awareness of it in the room as I stood up, clutching my own folded sheet of printer paper, and began to speak about my dear friend Gabe. It was one of the things I had to avoid saying in Gabe's eulogy, the obvious thing, that he was only 29, and his death was so sudden, by anyone's estimation, it would have been more likely I was speaking at the happiest day of his life. My dear friend Gabe. This was the one line I'd prepared, and now I'd said it. I'd hoped to come up with more by the time I arrived at the funeral. In my studio as I packaged orders, on the flight from LA, the car ride from the airport. But no, nothing. I lowered the microphone, stalling for time, and tried to remember how I was supposed to feel about Gabe. Outside, UC Berkeley students chatted on the street below us. Cars and trucks drove along the city's concrete hills. It was a beautiful, cloudless day. Gabe was the kind of friend who was more like family, I said. This was true. Having briefly dated as teenagers, when we met again in our 20s, we became friends so quickly it was clear we worked better that way, and we'd remained close for years. I could always count on him, I continued, launching into one quickly delivered anecdote after another to prove this point. As I scanned the faces in front of me, mostly Gabe's music associates and peers, plus both sides of his family, his father, his cousins, the aunts who'd flown in from Colombia, and his mother and her relatives and friends. I was sure none of them could tell, but I knew there was a disconnect between the words I was saying and what I was feeling. Not because I was in shock or numb, though I probably was both in shock and numb. And not because the stories weren't real. I had plenty of examples of Gabe being sweet and constant. Of course, it would never have been painless giving that eulogy, but it should have been easier. The problem was, even though Gabe was one of my closest friends, the month before, we'd made a dumb mistake and slept together. An immediate and important caveat. Gabe and I were actual friends. I won't mention this again because then the lady doth protest too much, but the point has to be made. We weren't the kind of friends who were never really friends. The kind of friends you see in a romantic comedy where there are 2 incredibly attractive people who are deeply emotionally invested in each other, and we're supposed to believe they never once considered the idea of sexual intercourse. The kind of friends who are secretly in love with each other and only realize minutes before one of them is about to get married or leave town, and the next thing you know, they're jumping in a car or on a horse or running down the street, whatever, and they tumble into bed, or
Sample complete. Ready to continue?